Thank you. So my name is Jay, and yes, I will be discussing...
A bit further away from your mouth.
Look further away. That better? That better? Is that okay? Not too loud, okay. So I conducted fieldwork and research on the 1999 Swedish criminalisation of the purchase of sex over 3.5 years. And I'm going to be quoting from some respondents, but illustratively, as we're a little bit pressed for time, and hopefully building to some extent on my colleague Pia's talk, which we heard this morning. So in terms of some more direct outcomes of the legislation, the law seems to have been used as a way of policing public space. It's used to displace sex workers from the street into clandestine space. And of course this increases the distance between sex workers and service providers and sex workers in any kind of police protection. On the law's introduction, CCTV was installed in areas of street sex work in Sweden, and police presence increased. As a result, of course, fewer people were willing to buy sex on the street, and there has therefore been increased competition. This has pushed down prices. This has resulted in difficulties in terms of negotiating safer sex work. Additionally, clients are now unwilling to leave contact information due to the fact that they're criminalised, and this places sex workers at risk, especially those who may need their money more urgently, who aren't well placed to refuse clients who won't leave their contact information. All of this is compounded by the fact that negotiations are increasingly hurried in terms of street sex work. Clients are agitated, they're stressed about the possibility of arrest now that they're criminalised, and there's less time for sex workers to suss out the situation. So I'm going to quote a sex worker respondent. She said, "You have to decide if you should go into the person's car. Now, the guy, he'll be really scared to pick me up, and he'll wave with his hand, come here, we can go around the corner and make up the arrangement, and that will be much more dangerous." And to quote the founder of Rose Alliance, Sweden's sex worker rights organisation, when it comes to street sex workers, they'll sometimes have problems negotiating condom use because of competition. There are less clients available for them because most good, serious clients think the safest thing is to buy sex from an indoor worker. Despite all of these increasing difficulties for sex workers, it's claimed that the law protects sex workers from police interference through criminalising only the purchase and not the sale of sex. That's how the law is exported, that's how it's sold. In fact, I was assured by the Swedish National Rapporteur for Prostitution and Trafficking of the Swedish National Police, and I quote, the police definitely don't interfere, because selling sex is not criminalised. We don't target the woman or the person in prostitution. However, there are reports of police targeting sex workers directly. Police have been known to inform sex workers. Should I speak loudly?
Yes.
Yes?
Keep going.
Keep going? Okay. Police have been known to inform sex workers' landlords that their tenants sell sex. This means that the landlord has to is forced to evict the sex worker, otherwise the landlord could be prosecuted. Similarly, the police have been known to report sex workers to hotels and to venues, again forcing displacements of sex workers from civil society. This is kind of similar to the way that the police police public space and use the legislation as a way of displacing sex workers from visible space, from public space. Police are also known to prosecute sex workers under pimping legislation for working together for safety. I believe this is similar to situations that we've heard about in the UK and in other contexts. And in stark contrast to any police assertions that they don't target sex workers directly, I am aware of police harassing sex workers directly in their own homes. To quote one respondent, they come to my door, they ask for my ID and so forth. It's like harassment. The third time it's like, we know what you're doing, I mean what you're about, we're going to go after your clients. I make a living out of this, so I was really paranoid for a very long time. So that was really in stark contrast to that assertion from the National Rapporteur for Prostitution and Trafficking of the National Police, who's tasked with having a full knowledge of what the situation is in Sweden. Sex workers also face further direct interference from the state in the form of issues with child custody. In fact, sex work is specifically cited as a reason in some instances for the removal of child custody. As one sex worker respondent noted, if you want to be 100% safe, you should not have any children if you're a prostitute in Sweden. Further to all of these laws and policies being used to target sex workers themselves, migrant sex workers, as well as victims of human trafficking, face deportation from Sweden as a matter of standard policy. In one instance, and I think Pia actually mentioned this when she spoke this morning, in one instance a sex worker was deported from Sweden with, and Pia and I both have a copy of this deportation order, and I quote, "She has not supported herself in an honest manner," stamped on her deportation order as the reason for deportation. This is a far cry from a law that claims to protect sex workers from state-sponsored interference, which is how the Swedish model is sold internationally. In terms of some indirect outcomes of the Swedish model, I've been talking more about some direct outcomes in terms of displacement and so forth, but some indirect outcomes. Sweden's desire to abolish prostitution, Sweden's outspoken desire to abolish prostitution, that frames the Swedish model, has impacted service provision in Sweden. Specifically, it's impacted harm reduction. By harm reduction, I mean efforts to decrease or mitigate harm that can be associated with sex work. But harm reduction in Sweden is seen to be incompatible with the Swedish model. In fact, it's seen to legitimize, endorse, and encourage sex work. As a social worker from the Stockholm Prostitution Unit told me, harm reduction is in many ways a way of keeping people in the problem instead of helping them leave. As well as condom provision being imposed during outreach work for sex workers and their clients, the prostitution units are opposed to such outreach work. Safer sex selling information is felt to actually encourage sex work, encourage people to begin selling sex where otherwise they would not have done. As I was told by the National Coordinator Against Trafficking and Prostitution, maybe some young girl who isn't in prostitution for the moment, they find this on the internet and say, maybe it could be really safe because I have this handbook and I have these things, so nothing could happen. Moreover, since the Swedish model constructs sex work as a form of violence against women, providing information on how to avoid difficulty, providing information on how to avoid violence is fatalistically seen to be futile, it's seen to be pointless. As I was told by a social worker at the Stockholm Prostitution Unit, prostitution in itself attracts strange people, and I think prostitution has always been and always will be really, really dangerous. In what way can you help someone then? What kind of information would you give to help people? This is a social worker at the Stockholm Prostitution Unit. Since my knowledge tells me that prostitution is harmful, it would feel strange to hand out a kit with an alarm, a rape alarm. You go off with clients, people get raped anyway. Really quick, 1 minute.
1 minute, all right. Okay, 1 minute.
With such little service provision in Sweden, such little harm reduction, sex workers have to provide one another with condoms. There are reports of sex workers stealing condoms in areas surrounding areas of street sex work, and they have to learn how to avoid difficulty and danger from one another, from educating themselves, or from having experienced it personally. To all of these negative outcomes of the legislation and of Sweden's sex work policies generally must be added the law's failure to achieve its stated ambition. Sweden cannot demonstrate to have reduced overall levels of sex work. So to conclude, there has been no demonstrable decline in overall levels of sex work in Sweden as the law intended to achieve. And the Swedish model, as well as the understandings that frame it, have exacerbated danger and difficulty for sex workers. Ongoing claims that the Swedish model is a success should be regarded with great scepticism given the failure of the law to achieve its fundamental aim and given the law's substantial negative outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you.